In this video, Why Morphology Matters, I will define what morphology is. I'll discuss why it is so important to teach. I'll talk about how it's related to, but different than, vocabulary instruction, and I'll also provide some resources for lesson planning. So, what is morphology? Morphology is the study of the parts of words that have meaning. We need our students to become morphologically aware. So, what does that mean? Morphological awareness is an understanding that words can be broken into meaningful parts. A morpheme is the smallest part of a word that carries meaning. So, when we think of morphemes, we're thinking of affixes, prefixes, suffixes, and root words. There are two main types of morphemes. The first type is called an inflectional morpheme. An inflectional morpheme changes what a word does in terms of grammar, but does not create a new word. An example of inflectional morpheme would be ing as a suffix, or ed as a suffix, or s as a suffix. Inflectional morphemes often change the time or quantity. If a word has an inflectional morpheme, it's still the same word with a suffix or even more than one suffix added on. So, an example, take the base word car, add s, which is called a bound morpheme, to it. You're making it a plural, cars. In this case, s is called a bound morpheme because it can't stand alone. It's bound to the word. The second kind of morpheme is called a derivational morpheme. This changes the class of a word, which makes a fundamental change to the meaning of the word. So let's look at teach. Teach is a verb. If you add the bound morpheme, the suffix er, to the base word teach, you change the verb to a noun and you get teacher. English has absorbed other languages. So many roots and affixes come from other languages. 50% of all words in English come from Latin, and many technical specialized words in math and science come from Greek. Knowing this is another way for children to understand that English isn't crazy. There are reasons for why words are spelled the way they are, and children can discover this through learning the meaning of root words and affixes. Here are a couple of examples of instructional activities you can use to help students learn how to identify morphemes. So over here, you are having students work on identifying and distinguishing between phonemes, the sounds in words, and morphemes. So you are counting sounds in the words, and then over here you're counting morphemes. So cups, k, p, s, 4 sounds. And how many morphemes? Well, cup is the base word, so there's 1, and then s is the suffix, so 2. So there's 4 sounds and 2 morphemes. And over here, identifying morphemes, you are underlining base words and trying to find affixes, both prefixes and suffixes. In this semantic web, students are asked to think flexibly and use their word knowledge. So you have students write a prefix or base in the center and map or web words that come from that word part. So more advanced students can even link those webbed words to other prefixes and bases. So an example of a simple word web here from the Greek root tele is meaning far. So you can see here all the different ways to think about tele. So how is morphology different from vocabulary instruction? Well, children can learn up to 10 new words a week through explicit vocabulary instruction. Morphology allows a different strategic way to tackle word learning. Students can use morphological strategy to infer word meaning. So let's take an example. Let's say a child knows that a piglet is a little pig. And while they're reading, they encounter a new word they've never heard or they've never read before, owlet. They can infer, if they know the base word owl, that owlet means a little owl. In this example, the explicit teaching of owlet was never given, but the student could infer the meaning through their morphological understanding. So vocabulary and morphology are related, but one is a more strategic way of processing morphology versus learning the meaning of a word directly, which would be through direct vocabulary instruction. Pete Bowers, who studies morphology a great deal, refers to morphology as the binding agent. Morphology is the meaning piece. Orthography has to do with the spelling of letters and sounds. So when you link these to meaning, it provides a powerful vehicle for children to create knowledge. So let's look at how decoding and morphology are connected. We'll look at the example IVE. So how do we pronounce IVE when we're decoding it as a unit? Is it IV or is it IVE? How do we know? Well, in the word contrive, the E makes the I say its name. It's a long vowel, contrive. That's because the IVE does not have any morphological meaning in the word. It's just a part of the base word. Whereas in the word detective, you have a very different pronunciation, and the reason you know that is because it's a morphological unit here, and it's really, in this case, indicating that it's a type of person who detects. So when our students start to figure out, oh, there are two morphemes in the word, it allows them a strategy to figure out how to pronounce the word when reading, and then how to figure out the meaning of the word. So morphology is also the binding agent between decoding and comprehension. Students decode and connect what they've decoded to meaning. Our students need morphological awareness to be able to comprehend what they read, especially after 5th grade. Researchers have found that a 5th grade student's vocabulary of morphology is a better indicator of reading comprehension than his or her vocabulary. Research shows that students need to learn at least 2,000 to 3,000 words per year. So we're not going to make stacks and stacks of thousands of vocabulary words on index cards for our students to memorize. Even with the best evidence-based vocabulary instruction, you could teach, say, between 300 and 500 new words per year. So what happens to the remaining thousands of words? And the answer really lies in the realm of morphology. By teaching students about affixes, prefixes, and suffixes, and the meaning of root words, you are empowering students to unlock the meaning of hundreds, even thousands of unknown words. Through instruction in morphology, you give students a strategy to access the meaning of unknown words by themselves. They use their understanding of affixes as they read to help them figure out unknown words. So let's look at the root word claim or clam, which means to declare, call, or cry out. Knowing this root will help your students understand these sentences. So the first sentence, the clamor of the bell announced the end of the school day. And the second sentence, in a loud voice, the referee proclaimed our team the winner. And proclaimed actually has bonus. It has pro, which is a prefix that means for or forward, and it has a suffix ed, which indicates past tense. So students can apply their understanding of the root word here, and even if they can't give you a precise definition of the words clamor or proclaimed, they can certainly infer the meaning in the context of these sentences. Research shows that 90% of all unknown words, once you hit 3rd grade, are morphologically complex. And there are 9 prefixes that make up 75% of all prefixed words, and they're listed here. So you can really cover a lot of ground by teaching these 9 prefixes. There's no need to wait until students reach the point of encountering that complex morphology in text. Here's an example of morphology you can introduce to younger students. So here are some examples of how to break words down by morphemes. So first, let's look at the word deconstruction. It has 4 morphemes. De is a prefix that means off or from. Con is a prefix meaning with or together. Struct is a root word that comes from Latin and means to build. And ion is a suffix that means a result of a process. So deconstruction is a process of breaking something down into smaller parts. Now here are 2 examples of word matrices. One is basic, this one over here, and you can see how you would show your students how they're able to build words by using a prefix, a base word, and a suffix, adding them together to make a new word. And over here, this matrix has at the base struct, and this is a slightly more complex type of matrix. And you can see how having a working knowledge of roots, prefixes, and suffixes gives students a very good chance at being able to figure out this word in context. So here again, you're building words, building on this base and really allowing a lot of flexible thinking with how the word changes by adding prefixes and suffixes. Once students are in 5th grade, they'll encounter more morphologically complex text. So by equipping them with morphological awareness, they'll be able to independently work their way through dense, high-level text. So when we think about assessment, which is a really important part of knowing where to begin instruction, it's important to know that unfortunately there aren't any standardized measures of morphology available yet, but Ken Oppel is a researcher who is actually working on creating one currently. There are researcher-developed measures. So Joanne Carlisle, who studies morphology, gives the classic example called the farmed farmer example. So in this example, you give student a base word and you ask them to complete a sentence. So you give them, in this example, the word farm, and you say, my uncle is a ... You expect them to respond with farmer. Another component in assessment is to identify whether children have an awareness of morphology relationships between words. So that relationship can be opaque or it can be transparent. An example is swim and swimming. So children can hear and they can see the word swim in the word swimming. They can see how it's related. This is called a transparent relationship when you can actually see it. So an opaque relationship is when the sound and or the spelling shifts. So an example of an opaque relationship is sign and signature. So here in this example, the word sign is actually retained, but the spelling is retained, but the sound has changed. So students might not key into the fact that sign has anything to do with signature without you explicitly drawing their attention to that relationship. And the same with the relationship between 5 versus 5th. That's another relationship that can be considered opaque. You want to make sure to assess where student knowledge and challenges are by looking at their understanding of derivational and inflectional morphemes and opaque and transparent relationships. Here are some great resources for instruction. Morpheme Magic is a book that provides lessons to build morphological awareness. There's a Facebook group with great discussions among teachers, a lot of open source resources with slide presentations that are pre-made and ready to use. And then word matrices are also available. These are linked here, all of these resources, for you to start building words with your students.